The slave ports of Badagry: commerce, captivity, and cultural memory. Along the southwestern edge of Badagry, where quiet lagoons meet the Atlantic horizon, history lies heavy beneath the sand. To the untrained eye, this shoreline appears peaceful: canoes drifting, water shimmering, children laughing. But beneath this calm surface is one of the most painful chapters in African and global history. Badagry was not merely a town, it was a gateway, a corridor between homeland and exile, a place where commerce learned to speak the language of captivity. This is the story of the slave ports of Badagry, where human lives were priced, identities were stripped away, and memory itself was tested. Before European signals appeared on the horizon, Badagry was already a thriving coastal settlement. Its lagoons connected inland Yoruba communities to regional trade routes. Salt, fish, pepper, palm oil, ivory, and textiles moved through its waters. Badagry was not isolated. It was part of a complex African commercial world, organized, negotiated, and governed by local authority structures. But in the 17th century, a new demand entered the Atlantic economy. Across the ocean, plantations in the Americas required labor, cheap, permanent, and replaceable. The answer, in the eyes of European powers, was Africa, and Badagry's strategic geography made it vulnerable. As European traders arrived, Portuguese, British, Brazilian, French, and Spanish, the nature of trade changed. What began as exchange of goods transformed into a system where human beings became the commodity. Local intermediaries, coastal elites, warlords, and foreign merchants formed a deadly partnership. Captives were acquired through intercommunal wars, slave raids, judicial punishments, debt bondage, and kidnapping. They were marched in chains from the interior, sometimes for weeks, to the coast. For many, Badagry was the final African destination. In Badagry, captives were confined in barracoons, overcrowded slave pens made of mud, wood, and iron bars. Men, women, and children were separated. Disease spread quickly. Food was minimal. Water was rationed. Here, captives were inspected like livestock, branded or marked, counted, priced, and sorted. Their names, languages, histories, everything that defined them were rendered irrelevant. They were no longer farmers, mothers, warriors, or children. They were cargo. From the barracoons, captives were forced on one final journey. They walked several kilometers through sand paths and mangroves to what is now called the point of no return. This walk was deliberate, slow, humiliating. Chains clanked, whips cracked. Some collapsed and were beaten back to their feet. Others never rose again. At the shoreline, captives were loaded into canoes and ferried to slave ships waiting offshore. The sea, once a source of life and livelihood, became a boundary between known existence and permanent exile. For most, there would be no return, not in body, not in memory. The transatlantic slave system was not sustained by physical force alone. It depended on psychological domination. In Badagry stands the legend of the attenuation well, where captives were forced to drink water believed to cause memory loss and emotional numbness. Whether literal or symbolic, the meaning is clear. The system sought to break resistance, erase memory, destroy identity. A person without memory is easier to control. A people without history are easier to enslave. From Badagry, enslaved Africans were shipped primarily to Brazil, Cuba, the Caribbean, and North America. The transatlantic crossing was a floating graveyard. Bodies were packed below deck, chained together, lying in filth and darkness. Disease, suicide, and despair were constant companions. Millions did not survive the journey. Those who did arrived in a new world where survival meant forced labor, violence, and cultural dislocation. The wealth of the modern Atlantic world was built on these bodies. In one of history's sharpest ironies, Badagry later became a site of early Christian missionary activity. In 1842, missionaries arrived, building schools and churches and advocating against the slave trade. One of Badagry's landmarks, the first-story building in Nigeria, stands as evidence of this era. Badagry thus holds a contradiction: a town shaped by human trafficking and a town that witnessed early anti-slavery thought. Redemption did not erase the past, but it entered the conversation. Today, Badagry houses the Badagry Heritage Museum, slave routes, relics, and memorials. Visitors walk paths once soaked with fear. They touch chains once fastened to human wrists. But memory is not neutral. To remember Badagry is to confront African participation in the slave system, European exploitation, and global profit, the silence that followed abolition. Cultural memory is not about guilt alone, it is about responsibility. The slave ports of Badagry explain more than the past. They help us understand global inequality, racial hierarchies, cultural fragmentation, and historical trauma. They remind us that commerce without conscience creates catastrophe, and that forgetting history is a form of violence. Badagry is not just a site, it is a question. What do we do with a past built on suffering? How do we honor the dead without repeating their fate? As the tide moves in and out of Badagry's lagoon, it carries no chains now, only echoes. Echoes of footsteps, echoes of prayers, echoes of names that history tried to erase. To remember Badagry is to stand at the edge of history and choose truth over comfort. Because when memory is preserved, captivity loses its final victory.